has changed since I was in charge of it, so we will see. We're going to talk in kind of a very academic sense about what body composition is, okay? What really and truly is body composition? How are we going to measure it, okay? What are some of the common techniques that you guys are going to be able to encounter? What's the accuracy of those techniques? Why are some better than others? What are the pros and cons of each of those? And then what does it tell us in some ways about all of that? And then there'll be a little bit at the end on how and what do we know about various body compositions, how it can be altered in some ways, but also how does it affect sport performance, exercise performance, and the importance of those. That will probably be more Monday stuff. Okay. All right. If I say body composition, what do you think of? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Body type, how much fat mass you have. Okay. Anything else? DEXA. Okay. We're going to get to DEXA. It's a very nuanced sort of thing. Anything else? Okay. So, all right, why is this not going? We do this. Okay. Y'all think of things like this when you think of body composition? Right? Are these two individuals different in their body composition? Okay. Do you really know what they're different on? That's my question. Okay. Is there a reason from a body composition standpoint, right, that elite distance runners look very often like this and not like this? And that football players, especially offensive and defensive linemen, tend to look like this and not like this. Okay? And then we see lots of things that are this way, right? Like all of this, and I'm sure, you know, it's TikTok in the other world. You should just be that they would show these on infomercials at 2 o'clock in the morning. When I was in college, and you'd come back from being out of various things, you would see this, like, oh, look, I went from here to here, right? People, when they think of body composition, very often they think of weight and weight loss and muscle and things of that nature. And that's okay. But it's not the whole story, right? It's not the whole story. There's a more nuanced way to interact with all of this, okay? What body composition really and truly is a way for us to quantify, to put numbers on what are you made of, okay? What are you made of? What is the chemical composition of your body, okay? We have historically, if you look over time and how people have assessed body composition, it's tended to focus on fat and non-fat tissue in your body. Okay. Most of that was related to the fact that we did not possess the tools to be able to figure out, well, what's the other stuff that you're made of? How much water is in your body? How much sodium? How much calcium? Okay. How much bone? Whatever else is going to be there. Okay. In more recent years, say the last 30 or so, and this is becoming a much more useful and cost-effective clinical tool. We have, with advances in technology, now we are much more able to easily quantify other parts of what you're made of. Like I said, water, okay, plasma volume, total body water, things of that nature. How much? What's the mineral composition, especially in your bones? Okay, especially in your bones. Get into this a little bit later on, but ladies, I hope you've resistance trained. Y'all are right at about the age where you cannot raise your bone mineral density anymore. Okay, that's okay. We'll pick on the guys too. Guys, you're already past your peak testosterone levels. I'm sorry. It's all downhill from here. Okay, it's all downhill. Okay, same thing. Women, you want to predict menopause. You want to predict what your bone mineral density is going to be. If you're going to have a chance to have osteoporosis, I can ask every one of you now, how many of you have done sort of resistance training or higher intensity sprinting, running, jumping things up to this point in your life? If you haven't, you might want to go squat today. Okay? Right? You may not be able to raise it a whole lot from now, but if you continue to add those things, you can hang on to it more. But we'll talk about how we quantify that. What's the anatomical makeup of what you are? And a lot of those things, a lot of the parts of body composition in that way are related very closely to health outcomes. Okay, to health outcomes. At its most basic, okay, at its most basic, body composition tells us about your nutritional status. It tells us where are you going to fall from a net caloric standpoint. Okay, energy balance, that's going to be the key thing. If we want to change your body composition, we can use exercise, we can use now pharmacological interventions, right? Very much so. But the biggest thing if we want to change your body composition is we alter your nutritional status, okay? If you're in a negative energy balance, body composition changes. If you're in a positive energy balance, body composition can also change, okay? Quantifying body comp lets us separate you into essentially metabolically active tissues like muscle, and then non-metabolically active tissues, which is basically everything else. We'll get into, though, some other pieces of this kind of fat-free mass and stuff that we're going to do there. Okay, we know that body composition, for good or ill, sometimes for ill, is related to overall health status. Having excess adipose tissue is a negative outcome on our health. Okay, having excess adipose tissue and not exercising is likely as dangerous as smoking. Okay, it's as dangerous as smoking. If you exercise, then we can overcome a whole lot of what we might consider to be excess adipose tissue. Okay, bone density, muscle mass. Bone density predicts osteoporosis. It predicts when you fall, and when you age, everyone, you will fall. When you're older and you fall, you will break things. Okay, women who are osteoporotic will break things more often. Okay, you will fall, you will break your hip. It's just a thing that happens, right? I bring any of you guys up here, we shove you over, you fall down, you're not going to break your hip. My mom falls down, she's going to break her hip. Okay, my father-in-law falls down, he might not break his, but he's had 3 hip replacement surgeries. Okay, on those kinds of things. Too little muscle is a problem. You need muscle for force, to be able to walk, to run, to do everyday sort of activities. All right. I'm sure you guys have seen this, but we're going to hit it again. Okay. Body size versus body composition. Body mass index and weight and height, these are indicators of size. They tell us nothing about body composition. Okay. BMI is essentially a way for us to estimate your volume. How much space are you occupying? How tall are you for what you weigh? BMI makes no distinction between these, and they are not arbitrary, but these cut points for weight per height, okay? And it makes no distinction on, do you weigh too much for your height because you have higher bone mineral content, muscle mass, these kinds of things, or do you weigh more because you have excess adipose tissue? Okay. Relationships of BMI to weight and body composition differ in different groups. You all have certain BMIs. I have the same BMI. It is very likely that my body composition at the same BMI is very different than all of y'all. Okay, older versus young. It differs in men versus women. We'll talk about why a little bit later on. It differs in weight trained, especially weight trained, resistance trained people and non-weight trained people. There are also some racial and ethnic differences that are going to manifest, mostly because of differences in bone mineral composition, okay, that are going to exist in all of this. As basically all of health and fitness, if you take nothing away from our major, right, you should know if you have an elevated BMI, poor health outcomes, okay, poor health outcomes. You have an elevated BMI and you're sedentary, really poor. health outcomes. Okay? I want you guys to know cut points on BMI. Okay? Under 18.5, you are considered underweight. That's also a significant health risk. Normal is 18.5 to 24.9. Overweight is 25 to 29.9, and basically 30 and above is obese. We break the obesity categories down into, right, obese 1, obese 2, morbidity, and those things, right? But essentially, it's 30 is the cut. Okay. We're not going to get into why are these the cut points, how we arrived at these things as the cut points, but there is research behind them. Okay. But I also want to show you guys one other thing. Okay. One other thing. If I know your weight and I measure your waist size, okay, I measure your waist basically at your belly button. Okay. And we take BMI and we add a measure of waist circumference, and we can use those two things and get a really accurate prediction of your health risk. Nothing about body composition. Okay, nothing about body composition. Adding the waist circumference, though, really helps us counteract a lot of the folks that are like resistance trained that tend to be very lean, have lots of muscle, have lots of bone density, and they weigh a lot, okay, per their height, but they do not necessarily have a lot of adipose. Why do we measure here? Anybody remember what's going on here? Visceral fat. You guys remember visceral fat? Okay. Fat in and around your liver, portal vein in those places. It's just dumping out very low and low density lipoprotein and cholesterol stuff that's going to be there. Visceral fat is highly predictive of development of type 2 diabetes. Okay. Highly predictive of all of that. So we can look at these kinds of things. Okay. So if you have a waist circumference in men of 40 or greater, okay, women of 35 or greater, then that's going to raise even beyond what our BMI thing is going to be. I do want you guys to know these two numbers. Okay. I do want you to know these two numbers. And we teach this because some of you may end up in clinical situations where you can measure a waist circumference, you can measure height and weight, and you can do this, but you may not have access to things to measure actual body composition. And this can be a thing that we can monitor and help us predict chronic disease and sort of health risks. Okay. So if that is size, it tells us nothing about composition. Let's talk about the components then that we've got to be able to measure to understand body composition. Okay. We are going to, and I'm going to show you how we do this, divide the body into its chemical components. All right. Different ways of doing this will allow us different levels of detail on what those chemical components are going to be. Okay. It originated, and at its most basic, we separate your body into fat mass or adipose tissue, basically fat, and then everything else that we call fat-free mass. Okay. Fat-free mass will include muscle, it includes bone, it includes water, it includes other sorts of minerals, it includes your blood, all of these kinds of things, okay? But at its most basic, it's fat and fat-free. Okay. There are multiple what we call models, which I will show you guys in the next few slides that have been used to do this. Most of the differences in how we quantify this simply are going to get into what level of detail can we get on separating fat-free mass into its individual constituent components. Okay. The easiest ways to do this, we're just going to say fat and then everything else. That's it. Okay. Some of the more advanced models will say, okay, it's fat, but then it's muscle, it's bone, it's water, it's mineral, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Things to know. When we say fat mass, we mean all of the lipid tissue in your body. That is not just adipose tissue. There are other lipid tissues in your body, okay? Some of which we can quantify, some of which we can't. There is this idea, okay? Like a black swan, unicorn kind of thing about something that we call essential fat, okay? Essential fat. We know that your body needs some amount of lipid tissue in it in order to be alive. We have some guesstimates on what that is, but we don't know for sure because, like a lot of things, we can't experimentally test it. Okay. To experimentally test it, we would basically have to kill someone. We would have to calorically restrict them until we sort of, they lost weight, they lost muscle, they lost fat, all the way down to the place where it finally killed them. So we just have some estimates on essential fat. Okay. Essential fat, we know, is higher in women than in men. Okay. Higher in women than in men. When we talk about sort of what our ranges on these kinds of things are, we'll get a little bit more into that. We think essential fat is about 4% of body weight in men, about 8% of body weight in women. Okay. If we take and again, this is a TikTok thing, it's something hopefully you guys are more nuanced. If we take what you guys think of as like the leanest, most athletic woman you can think of, and we do a DEXA scan, we do a very accurate measure of her fat mass, it's probably going to be 18 to 20%. Okay. Women that essentially have no body fat are in the high teens or 20%. 8% is like unbelievably low. You see 4% in men. You see it reported less so, but it used to be when I was much younger, when we had worse technique. Oh, this dude has 2% body fat. No, he does not. Really lean men are 6, 8, 10% if you do a DEXA on it. Okay. Why is there a difference between men and women? Why is essential fat higher in women than in men?
Have extra fat mass.
They do have extra fat mass, but why?
Hormone.
Hormones, yes, the hormones are what drive that, but why? Right. Childbirth. Okay. Childbirth. Okay. It's all about making sure there is an additional caloric reserve to help support pregnancy. Okay. To help support pregnancy. And we're not really going to get into it very much, but you guys should talk about it in other classes and things. Women that dip low enough in their percent body fat stop having their period. They become what we call amenorrheic, which is also can be very dangerous in those ways. Okay. Fat-free mass is all non-lipid tissue. Lean body mass is, again, this mythical thing that's fat-free mass plus essential fat. People don't use this term very much anymore. They'll talk about lean mass. What they really mean is muscle. Okay. When we talk about lean mass, it's very often going to be a reference to muscle mass. Okay. Okay. I'm going to start. I don't know why this thing is put together the way that we're going to start over here, and we're going to work our way from right to left rather than left to right. It's a very strange sort of way. I told you there are different ways of splitting things out. On the right here is the most basic body composition model. We're going to break the body down into its two constituent components. Okay. Why it's called the two-component model. It's fat mass, so lipid tissue, and then everything else. Okay. Lipid and everything else. That's all we've got. Right. Then there is this model that, again, we can't really do anything about. It was called the Binky two-component model. That is fat and essential fat, even though we can't measure essential fat, so it's kind of worthless. And then lean body mass, which again, now we're looking at lean body mass, looks like fat-free mass. Remember on the previous slide, I told you that theoretically lean body mass is supposed to be fat, like essential fat, and this model is dumb. Okay, but you may encounter. Then we have these more advanced ones that we do more stuff with now. There's what's called an anatomical model, and then a chemical model. The anatomical model, you've got adipose tissue, and then muscle, and then your organs, and bone, and then all the other stuff, okay? This would be a way to do something if we were able to do an anatomical dissection, okay? You see things broken down like this from cadavers. You see research on animals and things broken down where it does this. The thing that we can get a little bit better at doing in us, non-invasively, is this chemical model, where there's fat, there's protein, there's carbs, there's water, and there's mineral. It's somewhat hard for us to tease out protein and carbs, but we can definitely do fat and muscle and water and minerals in that particular way. And it will let us have a much more accurate sense of what's going on. John?
I've seen scales that will tell you like your muscle and.
Yes.
Is that like true or? are they,
So
like,
we,
accurate?
yeah, so there's one over in the hub or before you go in. You guys all should have done essentially that in lab in health and fitness. You guys remember holding the thing out like this? Yeah, it's by, all it is bioelectrical impedance. And so the answer is yes, it is giving us some information. It's the least accurate of all of the ways to measure body composition, but it is a measure. And in relatively kind of average people, it doesn't do too bad. It's probably within 5 or 6%. In very lean people, it's terrible. In very obese people, it's also terrible. But it's not bad. Right. So yeah, I mean, it's real. We will talk about how it works and stuff a little bit. Probably it will be on Monday in that way. But yes, you can do those. Okay. Okay. When we want to measure and do things in these models, this is going to be a lot like measuring metabolism. Okay. There are direct measures and there are indirect or estimation measures. A direct measure would be to do a dissection. Just like what you did, right? In anatomy, you take the cadaver, you dissect it, you weigh out every tissue that's going to be there. You say, okay, this is muscle, weigh this. This is more muscle, weigh this. This is bone, do this, do that, okay? You dissect and you weigh your tissues. This has been done. There's a set of cadavers on which this has been done. And then we use those values to validate doing x-rays and DEXAs and MRIs and things that we're going to also use to measure them. Okay, so it's been done, but this is incredibly time consuming and labor intensive. Okay, you could then take your anatomical dissection and take your tissues and then do a chemical analysis of all of those individual tissues. What is in there? What is muscle? How much of the muscle is protein? How much water do we have? Okay, how much collagen is there in ligaments and tendons and those kinds of things. Okay, so this can be done, very labor intensive, very impractical. Right. So what we do now is we do what we call indirect measures. We do a thing that's called densitometry, where we essentially figure out how dense are you. Okay, how dense are you? One of the coolest ways of doing this is we basically dunk you in a tank of water to make sure you're not a witch. Okay. Anybody, do they still do this? Anybody been in the dunk tank in Dr. Larson's lab? No? Okay. We'll show you guys some examples of doing what we call underwater weigh. It's the same idea, right? You overfill the bathtub, you get in the bathtub, the water comes out, right? Different densities do different things. So we measure density. We can do high resolution imaging, things like an MRI or a DEXA. DEXA is just a fancy X-ray. MRI, we can spend 3 days talking about kind of how MRIs work. I did a lot of MRIs for my dissertation, so I unfortunately understand it way too well. And it makes you want to take a nap. At the end of the day, we break the body down. This is one of the ways you can break it down into our component kind of tissues and things, bone and fat. We estimate their volumes, we do some more stuff. You guys should have all done skin folds in health and fitness, right? Or in your other classes. We essentially pinch how much skin and adipose tissue we have at local sites, and we use that to estimate total body stuff. Surprisingly accurate if it's done by a person that knows what they're doing. Okay. Most of you guys, having done it once, don't know what you're doing. That's okay. But if people know what they're doing, this can be surprisingly accurate. The idea of bioelectrical impedance, or BIA, where we run an electrical current that you can't feel through 1 foot, up through your body, down the other side. And that tells us something about muscle mass, which has a lot of water in it. It really estimates water, because the current moves faster if you have more water. It moves slower if you have more adipose tissue. And we use that to then back out and predict density and then predict body composition. And then, as I've said, I've listed it here, but people mistakenly, right, will think that BMI is a measure of composition. Okay. Although weirdly, I don't know if you guys remember from health and fitness, all of our data on health outcomes all comes from BMI. Okay, it all comes from BMI. BMI is a terrible predictor of things except for everything else, right? We have no data, none. There's no population level data on actual measured percent body fat and cardiovascular disease risk and diabetes risk and everything else. It all comes from BMI. Because I can call you on the phone and ask you if you have high blood pressure, and ask you your height and your weight. And we can test thousands and thousands of people and do it that way. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we do that and kind of what we know about those things later on. Okay. Okay. So let's start talking about the idea of densitometry. Okay. For many, many years, like dating back into the 15 and 1600s, densitometry was considered to be the gold standard way of measuring body composition. Okay. So the idea behind densitometry, I think, is very clever and it's really, really kind of cool, right? You are, in this instance, you are the object. Okay. A body or a person is a mixture of your constituent components. So if we say fat and fat-free mass, basically, okay? Each of those things, your fat-free mass, but to be honest, muscle, bone, all of these things have their own things, and fat mass, they have different but known densities, okay? The density of water is 1. The density of bone is higher than 1. The density of muscle and protein, higher than 1. The density of fat, less than 1. That's all we need to know, okay? So when we put you in water, the relative net density of your body determines the extent to which you sink or float, right? The more you float, the more adipose tissue, the more fat you have, right? You will have more buoyancy in the water. The less fat you have, the more muscle, the more bone, the more you will want to sink. Because the densities of these tissues as they relate to water will tell us something. Remember, the equation for density is mass, which we can measure, divided by volume. Okay? Divided by volume. We can get volume strangely either by seeing how much water you displace if we put you in a dunk tank, or we can back calculate volume by seeing how much you weigh when we have you dunk yourself all the way underwater. And I'll show you guys how that works. Okay. As part of my postdoc, you think science is this really crazy, precise, kind of high level stuff. We measured swelling in people's bicep. This was quite a thing, so I will back up. For my dissertation and most of my PhD, we quantified muscle mass and fat mass in things using MRI, which is the single most accurate way to do any of this stuff. So I did this, my dissertation, I spent like 8 months circling shit in people's legs, okay, on all these MRI images, to quantify stuff. I go to my postdoc, and we are measuring swelling in the bicep by having people put their arm literally in a bucket of water and seeing how much water goes out of the tank, and then weighing the water, and then using that to calculate a volume. Okay, so we do this. We had this we spent a month trying to get the procedure down of how to put your arm in the right way and hold it precisely to do all of this. And I'm just like, can we just go get an MRI? And the answer is no, of course we couldn't, because it costs $800 an hour to get an MRI. For us, you guys go to get an MRI, they're going to bill you $3,000 for about every half an hour you're in there. If you all want to pool your money, you got some loose change laying around, we need to buy a magnet and set up our own MRI facility, because you can bill insurance and folks at about $5,000 an hour to use the thing. They cost about $3 to $5 million on the initial investment, right, to buy the magnet. But I mean, if they use them all the time, like, it's crazy. Anyway. We calculate your volume, okay? We know how much you weigh. We know how much you weigh underwater. We can calculate volume. We know your mass, we know your volume. We can calculate your density. And then based upon your density, we can then estimate through these calculations what your percent fat has to be to arrive at that particular body mass. Okay? We do this by knowing that fat has a density of 0.9 grams per cubic centimeter. Muscle is 1.1 grams per cubic centimeter. Water is 1.0 grams or milliliters per cubic centimeter on all of this. You get a density, you plug this density into something called the Seary equation, which you guys should have seen before, right? And then we use that to estimate percent body fat. Okay? That's how we arrive at all of these things. So here's an example, okay? Do not think of this as Jack and Dave. Think of this as 22-year-old Dr. Black, 46-year-old Dr. Black. It's a surprisingly accurate kind of thing. It makes me somewhat sad and a whole host of other things. Okay. Jack and Dave weigh the same and are the same height. Okay. When we look at all of this, though, they both weigh 205 pounds. All right. But when we weigh them on this little scale, when they dunk themselves underwater, Jack weighs more underwater than Dave does because Dave is less dense. He's more buoyant underwater. So there's more buoyancy trying to pull him up. Therefore, he weighs less. Okay. This is because Dave has greater adipose tissue. Right? He's got more tissue that has a density that's less than water. Okay. That is less than water. And so we can use all of this then to calculate out, right, from their density, their relative percent body fat, their fat-free weight. And if we want to alter that, then how much we're going to have to do. If you know your muscle mass, we can guesstimate your resting metabolic rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Man, y'all packing shit up like 2 minutes before. Okay. Let me just hit this really quickly and we'll get you guys out of here. Okay. There are limitations to densitometry, right? There are, because there are differences in the composition of fat-free mass. All right. If you have greater bone mineral density, then your fat-free mass will have a greater density than somebody who has the same amount of muscle but has less dense bones. Okay. And total body water also is going to vary. Hydration status is going to matter. And so this is going to be some issues that we're going to experience. Okay. All right. We will stop here. I will see you guys on Monday. If I don't have your test, better get it to me. Okay. All right. Have a good weekend, guys. Make good choices. Hope we don't lose by 50.